keepsakes of whatever kind, were fairly common in serial cases, of course. The photographs would help tide him over during his downtime. And in a grisly new twist, he had used the souvenirs to keep his living victims right where he wanted them, paralyzed with fear. As we drove through Southeast, Sampson finally broke the silence in the car. "Alex, I want you to come on to this case. Officially," he said. "Work with us. Work with me on this one. Consult. Whatever you want to call it." I looked over at him. "I thought you might be ticked off at me about taking over a little back there." He shrugged. "No way. I don't argue with results. Besides, you're already in this, right? You might as well be getting paid for it. You couldn't walk away from the case now if you tried." I shook my head and frowned, but only because he was right. I could feel a familiar buzz starting in my mind, my thoughts involuntarily locking on to the case. It's one of the things that makes me good at my job, but also the reason I find it impossible to be kind of involved in an investigation. "What am I supposed to tell Nana?" I asked him, which I guess was my way of saying yes. "Tell her the case needs you. Tell her Sampson needs you." He took a right onto 5th Street, and my house came into view. "Better think of something fast, though. She'll smell it on you for sure. She'll see it in your eyes. You want to come in? Nice try." He left the car running when he stopped at the curb. "Here I go," I said. "Wish me luck with Nana." Hey man, no one said police work wasn't dangerous. Chapter 62. I worked on the case that night in the attic office. It was late when I decided I had enough. I went downstairs and grabbed my keys. I was in the habit most nights of taking a spin in the new Mercedes, my crossover car. It drove like an absolute dream, and the seats were as comfy as anything in our living room. Just turn on the CD player, sit back, and relax. This was good stuff. When I finally got to bed that night, my thoughts took me back to a place I still needed to visit now and then. A sanctuary. My honeymoon with Maria. Maybe the best 10 days of my life. Everything was still vivid in my mind. The sun drops just below the palms as it sinks toward a horizontal line of blue out beyond the balcony of our hotel. The empty spot in the bed next to me is still warm where Maria was until a minute ago. Now she's standing at the mirror. Beautiful. She's wearing nothing but one of my dress shirts, open down the front, and getting ready for dinner. She always says her legs are too skinny, but I find them long and lonely, and get turned on just looking at them, at her in the mirror. I watch as Maria sweeps her shiny black hair back into a clip. It shows off the long line of her neck. God, I adore her. Do that again, I say. She indulges me without a word. When she tilts her head to put on an earring, her eye catches mine in the mirror. I love you, Alex. She turns to face me. No one will ever love you the way I do. Her eyes hold mine, and I believe that I can see what she's feeling inside. The way we think is so unbelievably close. I stretch my hand out from the bed for her and say, Chapter 63. Something heartfelt, but I couldn't remember what it was now. I sat up, all alone in my bed, jarred from the half-awake, half-asleep place I'd just been. My memory had stumbled onto a blank spot, like a hole in the ground that wasn't there before. The details of our honeymoon in Barbados had always been so crystal clear in my mind. Why couldn't I remember what I'd said to Maria? The clock next to me glowed. 2:15. I was wide awake, though. Please, God, I thought, these memories are what I have left, all I have. Don't take them away, too. I switched on the light. Staying in bed now wasn't an option. I wandered out into the hall, thinking maybe I'd go down and play the piano. At the top of the stairs, I stopped with my hand on the banister. The soft, rasping sound of Allie's breath held me where I was. I stepped into his room and watched my little boy from the doorway. He was just a small lump under the covers, a bare foot sticking out. His breath sounded like a miniature snore. The Blue's Clues nightlight on the wall was just enough to show his face. Little Alex's eyebrows were knitted tightly, as though he was deep in thought, just the way I look sometimes. When I crawled under the covers, he nuzzled up to my chest and pressed his head into the crook of my arm. "Hi, Daddy," he said, half awake. "Hey, pup," I whispered. "Go back to sleep." "Did you have a bad dream?" I smiled. It was a question I'd asked him countless times in the past. Now the words came back to me like a piece of myself I'd let go. He'd given me my words. I gave him Maria's. "I love you, Allie. No one will ever love you the way I do." The boy was perfectly still, probably asleep already. I lay there with my hand on his shoulder until his breathing went back to that same soft rhythm as before. And then somewhere in there, I went back to be with Maria. Chapter 64.
The memories of his father were always the strongest when Michael Sullivan was with his sons. The bright white butcher shop, the freezer in the back, the bone man who came once a week to pack up meat carcasses, the smells of Irish Carrigallen cheese, and of black and white pudding. "Hey, batter," Sullivan heard, and it brought him hurtling back to the present, to the ball field near where he lived in Maryland. Then he heard, "This guy can't hit worth spit. This guy's nothing. You own this mutt." Seamus and Jimmy were the trash talkers for the family baseball games. Michael Jr. was as focused as ever. Sullivan saw it in his oldest son's bright blue eyes, a need to strike out the old man once and for all. His son wound up and let fly, a sharp-breaking curveball, or maybe a hard slider. Sullivan exhaled as he swung, then heard the smack of the ball as it hit Jimmy's catcher's mitt behind him. Son of a bitch, it brought some heat. Something like pandemonium broke out on the otherwise deserted American Legion field where they practiced. Jimmy, the catcher, ran a circle around his father, holding the ball in the air. Only Michael Jr. stayed calm and cool. He allowed himself a slight grin, but didn't leave the pitching mound, didn't celebrate with his brothers. He just bad-eyed his old man, whom he had never struck out before. He ducked his chin, ready to go into the wind-up, but then stopped. "What's that?" he asked, looking at his father. Sullivan looked down and saw something move onto his chest, the red pinpoint of a laser sight. He dropped to the dirt beside home plate.
Chapter 65.
The vintage Louisville slugger still in his hand splintered apart before it hit the ground. A loud metal ping sounded as a bullet ricocheted off the backstop. Someone was shooting at him. Maggioni's people? Who else? "Boys, dugout, now! Run! Run!" he yelled. The boys didn't have to be told twice. Michael Jr. grabbed his youngest brother's arm. All three of them sprinted for cover, fast little bastards running like they just stole somebody's wallet. The butcher ran for all he was worth in the opposite direction. He wanted to draw fire off of his boys, and he needed the gun in his car. The Humvee was parked at least 60 yards away, and he ran as straight a line as he dared to get there. Another shot came so close that he heard it whiz by his chin. The gunshots were coming from the woods to the left of the ball field, away from the road. That much he knew. He didn't bother looking around, though. Not yet. When he got to the Humvee, he threw open the passenger side door and dove inside. An explosion of glass followed. The butcher stayed low, face pressed against the floor mat, and reached under the driver's seat. The Beretta clipped there represented a broken promise to Caitlin. He drove the magazine home and finally took a look up top. There were two of them coming out of the woods now, two of Maggioni's wise guys for sure. They were here to put him down, weren't they? And maybe his kids, too. He unlatched the driver's door, then rolled outside onto gravel and dirt. Chancing a look under the car, he saw a pair of legs headed his way in a shuffling run. No time for deep thought or any kind of planning. He fired twice under the chassis. Maggioni's man yelped as a blossom of red opened above his ankle. He went down hard, and the butcher fired again, right into the hood's twice-shocked face. The bastard never got off another shot, word, or thought. But that was the least of his worries now. "Dad! Dad! Dad, help!" It was Mike's voice, coming from all the way across the park, and it was hoarse with panic. Sullivan jumped up and saw the other hitman headed for the dugout, maybe 75 yards away. He raised his gun, but knew he'd be firing toward his boys, too. He jumped in and slammed the Humvee into drive.
Chapter 66.
He floored it, as if his boys' lives depended on it. Probably they did. Maggioni was the kind of coward who would kill your family. Then he held the Beretta out the window, looking for one clear shot. This was going to be close. No way to tell the outcome, either. Suspense City. The hitman was sprinting across the infield, really moving now. Sullivan guessed the guy had been a decent athlete when he'd been younger. Not too long ago, either. Michael Jr. watched from the dugout steps. The kid was a cool head, but that wasn't necessarily helpful now. Sullivan screamed at him, "Get out, Michael! Down! Right now!" The hitman knew Sullivan was coming up behind him. Finally, he stopped and turned to make a shot of his own. Mistake. Possibly fatal. His eyes went wide just before the Humvee's grill caught him in the chest, moving at 50 miles an hour plus. The vehicle didn't slow down until it had given the hitter a swift ride, then rammed him into the chain link of the backstop. "You boys all right?" Sullivan yelled, keeping his eyes on the hitman, who wasn't moving and looked like he'd have to be peeled off the fence. "We're okay," Michael Jr. said, sounding shaky but still in control of his emotions. Sullivan walked around to look at the punk, what was left of him anyway. The only thing keeping him on his feet was the steel sandwich he was trapped in. His head lolled lazily to one side. He seemed to be looking around, through the one eye not totally obscured with blood. Sullivan went and picked up the remains of the Louisville Slugger from the dirt. He swung once, twice, again and again, punctuating each blow with a shout. "Don't fuck with my family! Ever! Ever! Ever!" The last swing went wild and missed. Sullivan put a huge crater in his hood, but it helped him remember where he was. He got in the car and backed up to where his boys were watching like a crowd of zombies at somebody's funeral. When they climbed inside, none of them spoke, but nobody cried either. "It's okay now," he told them. "It's over, boys. I'm gonna take care of this. You hear me? I promise. I promise you on my dead mother's eyes." And he would keep his word. They had come after him and his family, and the butcher would come after them. The mob. John Maggioni, Jr.
Chapter 67. I had another session with Kim Stafford, and when she came in, she was wearing dark sunglasses and looked like someone on the run. My stomach just about dropped to the ground floor of the brownstone. It struck me that my professional worlds were colliding on this case. Now that I knew who Kim's fiancé was, it was harder for me to respect her wish to keep him out of this. I wanted to confront this piece of crap in the worst way. "Kim," I said at one point, not too far into the session, "does Sam keep any weapons in the apartment?" Sam was the name we had agreed to use in our sessions. Sam was also the name of a bulldog that had bitten Kim when she was a little girl. "A pistol in the nightstand," she said. I tried not to show the concern I was feeling, the alarm sounding loudly inside my head. "Has he ever pointed the gun at you? Threatened to use it?" "Just once," she said, and picked at the fabric of her skirt. "It was a while ago. If I'd thought he was serious, I would have left him." "Kim, I'd like to talk to you about a safety plan." "What do you mean?" "Identifying some precautionary measures," I said.